As an engineer, it's so easy to get tied into this. Well, it's shiny, it's new, it's cool, it's fun. But where's the actual application? It could be shiny and new and interesting and in theory worked very well. But if my clinician doesn't like how it feels in their hands and doesn't actually want to use it, well, then it's providing no kind of value. So please tell me that my baby is ugly so we can, make the device a little prettier and actually usable.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as mentioned in the introduction, we have a terrific guest with us, Dr. Irena King, CEO and founder of Surgicure Technology, and she's leading a critical transformation in emergency airway management. With a background that includes global commercialization, clinical training, and medtech operations, Irena brings a rare combination of experience, innovation, and impact to the table. Her company's flagship product, the Horseshoe, is a novel patented solution for more reliable ET tube securement, prevention of facial pressure injuries, and a more effective oral care product. This technology not only improves clinical outcomes, but also offers cost savings and device versatility in critical care, burn trauma scenarios, and during evacuation or transport. In this episode, we'll explore how Surgicure is creating clinical impact through product innovation, thoughtful design, and a clear mission to save lives when seconds count. Hey, Irena, are you ready to be our guru today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Sure. So I am a first generation Russian Ukrainian American. And so I was raised with a deep appreciation for opportunity, grit, resourcefulness, which is particularly important in the entrepreneurship environment. Academically, I'm a neuroscientist and a medical engineer by training and have actually contributed research to various areas, including vaccine development in the neurodegenerative diseases space, diagnostics and biomarker discovery for infectious diseases, and now, of course, medical devices, which I think speaks to my dedication to innovation in healthcare in general, regardless of the area or discipline. And in fact, every one of my projects has actually started with a champion voice, whether it was a friend or a family member or someone that I had just been introduced to. Every single project has been driven by a human being vocalizing a frustration, a fear, or some kind of need. And outside of work, I'm a lifelong equestrian jumper and a classical pianist. So I have a lot of creative outlets. And I've also been known to book spontaneous trips on my own just to take a pastry class in Paris, for example. So I try to keep things interesting, try to keep myself very busy and always learning.
Yeah, I love that. I've got to ask about the equestrian jumping, though, because I've got a brother-in-law here that raises horses. He does Welsh ponies. But do you have your own horses, or that you work with, or you just have some that you know of and use those for your jumping?
I've owned horses in the past, but most recently I've just been barn hopping and trying to figure out a way that I can actually start a facility up here in Massachusetts with a couple of friends sometime in the near future. So in the works.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, first of all, with Surgicure, it's a real interesting company and some products that you have, which we'll get into. But what inspired you to tackle something as high stakes as emergency airway management? Can you give us some insight into that?
That's a good question because it was actually a very spontaneous endeavor to begin with. As I mentioned, my background is in neuroscience, so did not foresee myself being in emergency airway management space initially. But I was sitting in a classroom as an undergraduate student at American University studying neuroscience and bioentrepreneurship when I discovered that two respiratory therapists in the U.S. Army had actually developed some initial technology to secure breathing tubes for primarily their burn and trauma patients who were in challenging battlefield conditions during evacuation and transport. support. This was because they just couldn't sustain current technology like tape, straps, wires, because of burns on their face, blood, secretions, maxillofacial injuries. And so the inspiration for the device actually came from real frontline challenges. And unfortunately, these two inventors, one of them was deployed, another was transferred to another facility, couldn't continue working on the device. And I was frustrated that there was a seemingly simple solution sitting on a shelf to what seemed like a pretty big problem to me. And so, as part of this class, I ended up going and conducting interviews with clinicians, nurses, both in the military and civilian healthcare. And when I saw there was an opportunity, I ended up cold calling the Army Tech Transfer Office, licensing the patent as a foundation for our work, and then bootstrapping my way to founding Surgicure. And so that was really how it all started. Like I said, very spontaneous decision, but it's definitely been a very worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, well, what a great opportunity, and it sounds like a challenge, but it was. I'm glad you picked it up off the shelf. But for our audience, as I looked and did my research, the Horseshoe device really seems like it's a game changer, in the innovative and innovation of airway management. So, what makes this technology so unique compared to current airway access options? Can you help us understand that a little better?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, there's a huge reliance on tape adhesives. Traditional holders rely on straps, patches, and like I said, they can be unreliable due to burns on the face, maxillofacial injuries, even facial hair. I mean, if you think about adhesives, don't really stick to hair pretty well. And this can lead to issues with instability, tube instability, actually securing the tube, especially in areas like critical care and emergency response, where there's a lot of movement going around. And 30% of unplanned extubations actually do result in preventable death and can contribute to an increase of $5 billion in annual healthcare costs. Not just that, but anything that creates additional pressure, pressure to the face, the corners of the mouth, risks the development of pressure injuries. And so the Horseshoe isn't just another tube holder, it's actually a completely reimagined solution that has a face-free design, so it's free of adhesives. It has a very intuitive locking mechanism, intraoral molar prop, so it actually keeps the mouth open and allows access to the oral care for a focus on improving oral hygiene. And it's really designed for versatility of environment. But all in all, compared to current solutions on the market, we do focus on minimizing unplanned extubations, pressure injuries, which traditional tape and holders may not be able to reliably do.
Yeah, I like that oral care aspect too, because I think, in my opinion, that seems to be a really underserved area in terms of preventing infections and pneumonia. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Oh, absolutely. And this was actually some of the earliest feedback that we got was from nurses during the height of the pandemic who were talking about, how do we prevent infections, ventilator associated pneumonia in the most effective way possible. And an effective way to prevent the risk of ventilator associated pneumonia is consistent oral care. And some of the feedback that we got was that there is actually a fear of being bitten when going into a patient's mouth, or the tube being bit into, or disrupting the tube. And so there really was this need of security and access. And that was something that we had learned just working really closely with clinicians and nurses from day one, and something that we really wanted to implement in the development of the device.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, looking at your product, the Horseshoe, as you touched on, you're doing not only pursuing a pathway with civilian medicine, but also military. Now, a lot of our listeners out there are entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs. So, how are you navigating that? Can you give us any tips that, because they're both really different pathways to commercialization. So, what are you and your team doing, and what best practices have you learned along the way?
Yeah, so we started with the highest acuity environments first. So burn, trauma, transport. I mean, this is why the device was originated in the first place. And so that naturally lend itself to a dual use value. But we've been engaging with both hospital systems and military buyers. And the military generally needs devices that are very adaptable, quick to deploy. But many of those needs actually do translate to under-resourced hospitals or chaotic trauma bays. And so we're pursuing them both in in parallel and just aligning our value proposition to each environment. But we've actually found a lot of synergies between the two, and have developed great relationships that have been able to speak to both areas.
Yeah, yeah, that's terrific. And then, you've also worked, as you touched on with your career, globally in med tech and many different disciplines. So I'm wondering if you can share with us the international perspective on this as well, and how you're trying to reach some of those international markets and what you've learned along the way with that.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
So I think, to start generally, I think my international experience has definitely been foundational to how I think about product design and market entry. And I've seen firsthand how infrastructure, resources, and clinical protocols can vary pretty dramatically, not just from country to country, but even just neighborhood, region to region. And I think that exposure taught me that if we want to improve outcomes globally, we can't just build for perfection, though we certainly strive to do so, but we also have to build for practicality, flexibility, and resilience. And I think this perspective is especially important now as growing geopolitical instability, natural disasters, and health emergencies continue to strain healthcare systems worldwide. We've gotten a lot of questions about the application of our device in conflict zones, and we really are seeing an increased demand for devices that can perform under pressure. So, not just in high tech ICUs, but also in field hospitals, stabilization points, underserved communities. And so with Surgicure, we definitely want to make a deliberate effort to make sure that the device and this device and everyone thereafter is easy to deploy. It's compatible with existing equipment. It can fit into something portable or on a tray, and it's usable by providers with varying levels of training. And so I think for us, it's really important that we close the gap between innovation and access, because high quality care, life-saving care shouldn't be limited by geography or circumstance.
Yeah, I like that. And I might put you on the spot here for just a
Sure.
minute and forgive me. But, with those different environments, I'm wondering if there's been any like aha moments in your product development that, it led you to something that you didn't think you'd get to as you started this journey.
Yeah, and it's usually the simplest things that, I think when you're working on a device, and most of us are engineers, so we get really, really excited about the quote unquote toys that we're playing with and tinkering with, and we get really excited about our solutions. So it's easy sometimes to miss on the minute things that a clinician or someone in the field is going to point out to you. And it could be an example of a clinician saying, okay, well, which side up? And we thought, oh, okay, we need some kind of visual indicator that tells you immediately which side up. We need grip enhancers that, if you're in a dark or low lit area, it's very clear where you need to grab the device and what are the movement points of the device. Our company colors are orange and red. Those are very bright colors and may not be conducive to a military or in-field environment. So how do we make those adjustments based on where the device is being used? These were all seemingly small things, but very, very important things to our end users that needed to inform our design.
Yeah, I love that. And the reason I love that story is because oftentimes we're talking to innovators about how important it is to immerse yourself in that market, right? And I don't know, you might have gotten there, but it sounds like you got there quicker because you did immerse yourself in those markets. Is that what you found?
Absolutely. And, when we first started, we were months away from the world shutting down because of the COVID pandemic.
Right.
And so we really had to work closely with clinicians from the get go. And we interviewed folks from all areas: critical care nurses, trauma docs, respiratory therapists, military medics, for the course of several years. And before we even introduced the idea of the horseshoe, we were interviewing them exclusively based on the current problems that they were seeing, the tools that they were using, protocols they had to follow, as well as companies and technologies that they highly respected. And this was how we were able to learn things that we didn't necessarily expect to learn, but we had more of an unbiased approach to the actual design of the horseshoe, because we took that feedback first before getting into the nitty gritty details of the actual engineering.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good, and I appreciate that. And then I wanted to touch on too. You talked about innovation and that process for you and your team. So, for our gurus out there that are just starting in this journey, how do you foster a culture of innovation within your team? And what advice would you give some of these other founders, to bring a bold idea to life? Can you provide us any insights?
Yeah, so we live by the motto made by clinicians for clinicians. And I firmly believe that innovation starts by listening very deeply. As I just
Mhm.
mentioned, we took our interviews and outreach to clinicians, KOLs very seriously. And listening to their pain points, of course, the workarounds, but also paying very close attention to the things that people don't always say out loud. And during my graduate studies, I actually had the really unique opportunity to participate in clinical rotations. And I did spend a good amount of time in the OR and the ICU working alongside nurses, clinicians. And it was a really interesting opportunity to be a fly on the wall and notice the things that, the workarounds, the things that weren't necessarily said, but things that they just had to work with on a day to day basis, the challenges that they were saying, and the hesitations they were feeling, but not necessarily vocalizing. And so paying really, really close attention to what's happening on the ground and getting that real time feedback. And so I hope that our team is fostering innovation by keeping us grounded in those real world problems and giving us room to actually challenge assumptions. And so, my advice to other founders trying to bring these other ideas to life is to not over engineer from the start. Really start with utility, build with feedback, and then stay relentlessly focused on solving the problem at hand.
Yeah. So, and with that, do you find that you have a little bit of a risk of sharing some of your ideas too early? Or is that just you kind of take that and just go, we're going to gain so much from this that it really doesn't matter?
Sharing ideas with our end users too
Yes.
quickly.
Correct. Yeah.
So we didn't share our ideas in the
Okay.
beginning at all.
hmm
We took ideas from our end users first and
hmm
then used that to inform our end solution. I definitely think, eventually you do run into the challenge of everything in the kitchen
hmm
sink. And of course, we would love to have a one size fits all product with all the bells and whistles, but often is unrealistic. But I think having that feedback, whether it's highly positive or highly negative, is super informative and not just going to build the next generation of the product at hand, but gives you insight into what's to come and what's important to your end users.
Yeah, yeah, that's very helpful, and that kind of leads me to the next question too, because with your background, as mentioned, you just recently obtained your PhD, and congratulations for that. But you've done a nice job of combining product development with evidence building, right? So, what's been your approach to some of this clinical validation, testing, and feedback? Just share with us how that's led you down this path, and you gotten to those outcomes that you needed to get to for product launch?
Absolutely. So I approached clinical validation very much from the mindset of, well, a student.
hmm
So I've been a student all my life until about a couple months
Yeah.
ago, but still a student of life, of course. And also as a scientist, so which you approach things with curiosity, with being very humble minded and determined to get real data, not just checking the boxes. And from the beginning, I didn't want a polished pitch. I wanted the truth. I wanted to, I reached out to clinicians not as a company trying to sell something, but as an academic speaking to another academic. I said, let's get real. What works? What doesn't work? And how do we make this better together as we move forward? And so we've conducted cadaver studies, human factors assessments. We've done informal evaluations in hospitals and human testing in the OR. And we have a number of clinicians consistently providing feedback pretty much every step of the way. And we have designed clinical protocols to look at key metrics around safety, around user satisfaction, and of course, tube stability. But beyond those formats, what's really mattered is the mindset and the conversations that we're having with our partners. It's not just collecting validation, but we're actually building relationships and trust. And I just mentioned, I'd rather have someone love the device, of course, or completely hate it, rather than tell me it's fine and it works, because there's nothing really to act on. But if someone tells me exactly why they dislike it or where it shines, that's actually actionable. It tells me that they care. It shows me who our future advocates are, and what changes will actually move the needle in patient care. And so this kind of honesty first, data driven approach has shaped our product iterations. And I also hope it has shaped our internal culture. We're not here to take feedback personally. We're actually here to use it to elevate everything that we do.
Yeah, I like that building trust, right? Because I'm thinking, as you're talking about the, development and some of the iterations, yeah, I liked your comment about, they're not just going to give you the glossy, nice, feedback, but it takes that trust to kind of tell you that your baby's ugly, right? I mean, they got to feel comfortable that they can share that kind of information with you. Am I heading down the right track with that?
Yes, absolutely. And if it means scratching the initial design entirely, but actually developing something that they're going to use on a day to day basis and be happy with, I mean, that's what matters most. And I
Hmm.
think, as an engineer, it's so easy to get tied into this. Well, it's shiny, it's new, it's cool, it's fun. But where's the actual application? Because it could be shiny and new and interesting and in theory worked very well. But if my clinician doesn't like how it feels in their hands and doesn't actually want to use it, well, then it's providing no kind of value. So please tell me that my baby is ugly so we can, make the device a little prettier and actually usable.
Functional, right? But
Exactly.
I would think too, as an early stage, approaching it from an academic standpoint and an engineering standpoint, like you are, it kind of gives you that impetus of going, well, if I have to make a change, I know how to do that, right? So I think getting that feedback early on is very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we work in a very data driven and regulated industry, and rightfully so. I mean, we're working with patients, and oftentimes critically ill patients, and so every decision is incredibly important. And so the more feedback that we can get as early as possible, the better.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, picking up on something else that you mentioned leads to my next question, because many of our gurus talk about how challenging it's been, especially since COVID, to get access to clinicians, get access to these surgeons and nurses. And you've been in some very challenging areas, emergency medicine, trauma, critical care, OR, and not to mention military applications. But I liked your approaching them as and from academia too, and academia, right? So has that helped you, or have you honed any other techniques to get to these providers?
It certainly helped coming from academia, definitely helped open a few doors. And whenever I had the opportunity to go through training, clinical training, vendor training, researcher training, just so I can get inside the hospital, and not necessarily for Surgicure's purposes, but just to be that fly on the wall and to talk to people and understand where they're coming from and try to step into their shoes. That has been incredibly valuable. Other ways, we've done a lot of cold calling, a lot of cold emailing, of course.
Hmm.
We attend a lot of trade shows and conferences to build key relationships with, of course, early adopters and champion clinicians, but also with distributor networks. Relationships are everything, so I never say no to a meeting or an opportunity to get introduced to someone new, because you never know where it may lead. And education is a big piece. And so we've invested a lot in sales enablement tools, in videos, and as well as pursuing opportunities for KOL testimonials. And we've also found it particularly helpful to align our messaging and training with the respected standards and guidelines. So, like those from the National Pressure Injury Advisory Panel is an important one for us. And so this ensures that our approach supports best practices in pressure injury prevention, patient safety. It's a way to get involved with some of these other platforms. And beyond that, we're actively welcoming KOLs to not just test the device and speak openly about their experiences, but also help educate their peers through webinars and content and real world use cases. These are the providers that are living the challenges day to day. And so we want them to not only inform the next phase of development, but also help lead that broader conversation about improving airway management standards. So it really has gone both ways, kind of inviting that community, but also doing a lot of outreach ourselves.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the taking the time to align with some of those protocols and clinical pathways. Because as you were talking about that, I'm thinking, boy, that probably helped build some of that trust as well. Is that what you found?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all here to change the standard of care, right?
Hmm.
And the way you do that is by understanding what the existing protocols, guidelines, and standards are and how we could potentially make them better. But, we have to be able to speak the language that's comfortable with our end users and these organizations that have spent a tremendous amount of time and research actually perfecting what patient safety means and what quality care looks like.
Yeah, I love that. So, Irena, this seems like a really exciting time for you and your team at Surgicure, excuse me. What's next for you and your team, and where are you going from here?
Yeah, so we have been actively expanding in the last several months. We closed a seed round in January of this year. And so now we're targeting a full commercial launch, which is a very exciting milestone for us, of course. We're expanding clinical studies and pilots as well, exploring additional use cases. We are preparing for some government and international contracts. And longer term, we do envision building a portfolio of frontline care solutions. So, of course, starting with airway management, which is what we're focusing on right now, but ultimately becoming that trusted platform for clinician-driven innovation.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you and acknowledge you for just all the insights you brought as our guru today. If somebody wants to learn more, how do we do that? Is there a website? Are you on LinkedIn? How do we learn more about what you and your team are up to?
Yeah, we would absolutely love to connect with anyone and everyone.
Hmm.
You can learn more about Surgicure and the Horseshoe at www.surgicuretech.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. We are also welcome providers to join our growing community. So whether you're interested in giving feedback, sharing case experiences, contributing educational content, or helping shape the next generation of airway tools, you can also reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I always enjoy connecting with fellow innovators and change makers.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, once again, Irena, we really appreciate all the insights and appreciate the time that you took to be our guru today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me again. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 at gmail.com. And I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.